Come with me as we delve into the sometimes dark but interesting social history of medieval England. This time, medieval football. Alright guys, welcome back to Social History Sunday. Today we are talking about football. The ubiquitous sport which has developed out of the medieval mob football, which developed and evolved in England and has now become the number one sport throughout the world. It all started in England in the early medieval period. And it's ubiquitous within England. Yeah, don't forget, like there's Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, they all play football as well. But we're talking about England, where the game developed originally. And it is ubiquitous. There's probably a football team of some description in virtually every single village, town, city in England. To give you an idea, if you go online and do a simple search on the number of teams playing a game, if you look at the NFL in America, and if you include teams which categorize themselves as, say for instance, semi-professional or professional development or minor league teams, and add them to the professional top of the league teams and collegiate teams, you get a figure which is less than 2,000 for a population of 350 million. If you look at England, just England alone, we have a population of about 57 million and over 7,000 semi-professional and professional teams. Big difference, going from just under 2,000 for a population of 350 million to over 7,000 for a population of 57 million, 58 million. That shows you how many people are involved in football in England alone. And we have 140 leagues representing 7,000 teams. It's a lot of football being played. And it is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. It's not the national sport, believe it or not. Cricket is officially the national sport. But I think most people, if you ask them what's the national sport of England, they will say football. Now, the game started in England, but there's something we need to answer first, because there are people out there who will tell you that that football in England started somewhere else and that it was actually adopted in England and evolved from that point on. Now, there are a few theories that are bandied around as for the origins of football. And we'll start with the most common theory, which is that it comes from China. And it's based on the game, if I can remember what it's either Cujo. I think the name's called Cujo. Now, Cujo, played in China, there is written documentary evidence of Cujo dating from the 3rd century BC, I believe. Or was it the 3rd century B? I think AD. Anyway, a long time ago, 3rd century BC, I believe. That's fine, no problem with that at all. The game was played continuously up until the 1800s, and then it died out as a result of military conquest of China, blah, 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 blah. However, as for it being the origins of the game of football, there's a couple of problems with that hypothesis. First off, in order for a game to travel, like for a cultural icon like a game, to travel from one side of the world to the other, there has to be some kind of direct link, whether that's trade, diplomacy, warfare, whatever. There has to be some kind of direct link. And there was no direct link between Europe, never mind England, there was no direct link between Europe and China until the Portuguese went there trading in the 1500s. There was an indirect link that was set up as a result of Marco Polo, but that wasn't direct link. What I mean by direct link, the people from China were not travelling to Europe. People from Europe were not travelling directly to China and trading. There was trade goods being passed along, being like from China through the Mongol states, into the Eastern European states and into the Western Europe. So there was an indirect trade link, but nothing direct. And you really need to have a direct link for cultural mores to be passed on. That's the first thing. The second thing, until Marco Polo in 1270 something or other, 1272, there was nobody else had been there. Second thing, if you look at the game, there's virtually no similarity to the games at all, other than the fact that the Cujo is played on a rectangular pitch, and that certain ball skills with the modern game are interchangeable and documented as being part of the medieval game. But in terms of the medieval game connection, there's none at all. In fact, the nearest game to Cujo that you can think of as being possibly an evolution of Cujo is actually netball. For instance, you have your attack zones and your defence zones, out of which players are not allowed to move. Same as Cujo. It's not even related to basketball. The nearest comparison would be netball. There are no links at all, no comparisons at all between Cujo and medieval football. Even the modern game today, virtually no links, no similarities at all. So that's the main one. The second game that it's supposedly based on is the Roman game, Harpaston, which is actually based on the Greek game, which is Esperesos, something like that. But there's two games, the Greek game and the Roman game. The Greek game itself, actually, it's possibly based on a game that was played in by the Israelites, possibly, which was a ceremonial game. And so you have Esperesos and Harpaston, which is the Greek and the Roman games, which apparently are based on each other. Now the Roman game, Harpaston, is played on a rectangular court, so there's a sort of similarity, which I think was about the same size as a modern football pitch. But that's where the similarities end, apart from the tackling style, full body tackling, which was done in the Roman game as appeared in the English game. The Roman game, however, was played with a stuffed leather ball, yes, possible similarity to the English game, but to score, you threw the ball into a central circle, which then had to bounce out of that circle and be caught by one of your teammates. If you managed to do that, you kept possession of the ball, we think, and you scored a point. If a member of the opposition caught the ball, they scored a point and they gained possession of the ball, and you continued like that until the game period was over, and then blah, blah, blah. But the main similarity that people keep pointing to there is the shape and size of the pitch with a central circle. As in, if you look at a modern football pitch, the size and shape is roughly the same, and there's a central circle. That's as far as the similarities go, so I'm sorry, but that is no cause for claiming the football is based on that, especially when you start looking at how the game was played. Now, other games that some people will tell you are the wellspring, the genesis of football, is the Viking ball game, which is Felicia, something like that anyway. No similarity whatsoever, other than the fact that it's a team sport. The Viking ball game is basically baseball and field hockey combined. People have said that other games that have sprung from that include shinty and hurling. I can see the connection there, but that's as far as it goes. The other game pointed at is Gaelic football, or what's simply called Gaelic to this day. Now there are similarities there, however, the gameplay is similar. However, Gaelic football, which has its origins back in the distant similar sort of times to English football. The nearest comparison you get to that is good old Aussie rules football, where the ball is passed about and punched about to score goals, like where you punch the ball through the goals, things like that. Again, the only similarities tend to be the tackling, the full body tackling style. But even in Gaelic football, that's become a little bit more restricted. There are other theories. Some people have said that Christopher Columbus brought a game back from South America, which is the basis of English football. Not so. Completely different game. The game that was played in South America by the Aztec Mayan cultures is more similar to the Greek game of Hephaestus. I've forgotten the name already. Which is basically a team game using a ball to throw through a hoop on the side of a wall, sort of a vertical basketball. So there's no connection there either. Plus, Christopher Columbus didn't go to South America until 1472 and come back in 1473. And this is where the big kicker comes from. The English game, the first mentions of the English game are in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, dating back to about the 7th or 8th century, predating any other game mentioned in those sort of terms by a few hundred years. The first specific documented example of the English ball game is the Atherston ball game. And it was actually called the Atherston ball game. Now that game is almost identical to the game that is mentioned, as far as we can tell, in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, in that a ball is passed up and down or around a specific area for a specific amount of time, and the player who has possession of the ball at the end of the game, at the end of the time period, wins. And that's it. That's the game in a nutshell. And that game is still played to this day in the village of Atherston, which I believe straddles the border between Warwickshire and Leicestershire. And it's still played to this day in exactly the same way, apart from the 1190 game, which is the first recorded, documented case of the game being played, was played with a bag of gold. That game, by the way, was won by Warwickshire. And it's still played to this day, only it's played with what you might call a medicine ball, big ball like this. And the ball is passed up and down the high street until the end of the time period, and then whoever has the ball in their possession at the end of the game wins. Now here's the thing. It has no rules. There are no rules to the Atherston ball game. And there were no rules to mob football when it was first started playing in England. The only rule that was imposed on the Atherston game was don't kill anybody. And that's still the only rule that applies to the game to this day. Now, the important thing you need to consider is why the game began, why the ball game was played. Now, it seems to coincide, the introduction of the ball game seems to sort of roughly coincide by a difference of about 100 years with the introduction of Christianity into England in the 5th and 6th centuries. The games seem to have started at around about the same time. Now that's probably not a specific causal indicator. What it probably is, I think, is another example of what the Christian religion was good at doing. When they spread into a new area, they adopted and assimilated the religious practices or the cultural practices of the people living in that area at the time. For instance, Christmas. Like prior to the Christian era, Christmas was Yuletide, and it mainly celebrated the winter equinox. The time, so there was something being celebrated at the time. Christianity moved into an area in Northern Europe, and Yuletide became Christmas. The same with Easter. Easter was Estra, and it was the time. It was the celebrating the Viking and the Norse and some of the pagan gods of fertility at the beginning of spring. Christianity moved in and did this, and adopted and evolved the celebrations to suit the religion. And I think the ball game, as played in England, is another example of that. For instance, that's why it's played on, most of the time, it's played on Shrove Tuesday. The initial games were played on Shrove Tuesday. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, Shrove Tuesday, or as we call it, Pancake Day, was the day before Ash Wednesday, which is the beginning of the period of Lent. Lent commemorates Jesus Christ going into the desert and fasting for 40 days while reflecting and praying and preparing himself to start preaching in public. It's also the run-up to Holy Week, which is Easter. Now in England, these games were played on Shrove Tuesday and they were part of the celebration. Now on Shrove Tuesday, you prepare for Lent by eating all the foods that you're not going to be able to eat during the period of fasting, because you don't want food to go off, so you stuff yourself, you have a big party. And the ball games seem to have been introduced as part of this celebration. The idea being that the menfolk, the men and the boys, would get involved in these games and they would work off their frustrations and their aggression and their grudges and rivalries that might have built up during the long winter months within England, because we do have long winter months. We only have about 6 or 7 hours of daylight a day during the winter. And so people would prepare themselves by getting rid of all that pent-up aggression in the Shrove Tuesday ball games. And then they would be all nice and calm and relaxed and quite possibly recovering from injuries sustained during the Lent period, which was a period of prayer, reflection and religious devotion. So that's where the games started from. Quite quickly though, they spread from the one religious festival, Shrove Tuesday, the beginning of Lent, to other Christian celebrations. For instance, there were games played at Christmas, if the weather was good enough. So you had Christmas Day ball games, and it was played on All Hallows. So you had All Hallows Day or Halloween Day ball games that were played up and down the country. Sorry, almost every village had some kind of ball game going on. And this continued right up until, well, it continues today. The Atherstone ball game is still played today. There are numerous others. I think at the moment there's about 32 separate Shrove Tuesday ball games still played in England to this day. The nearest one to me, which is about 5 miles down the road, literally go out in my front door, go straight over, turn right, round to the roundabout, turn left, go straight up the long road, and you're in Sedgefield. And there is a ball game played in Sedgefield every Shrove Tuesday, and there has been, I believe, since about 1275. Now, if you compare the two ball games, they're two different ends of the spectrum in terms of size and things like that, but they're still precursors of the modern game. So the ball games continued being tweaked and little additions being made to the rules other than don't kill, and until you get to the point in the 15th century where the game is mainly played by kicking the ball. Nobody's no longer picking the ball up, although the tackling style is still full body tackling for the most part. Then the 16th century, we see the introduction of a restricted playing area. Usually it started on the village green and then shifted to fields of specific sizes, just basically to keep it all contained, because the games were getting bigger as the population got bigger, and people were taking up more space to play the games, and property was starting to get damaged and things like that. It's also in the 16th century we start to see a reduction in the number of people playing the game, to the point where there might be 3 games a day played in a particular town or village, with restrictions on the number of people playing the game. It's also, and then we get to the 16th, 17th centuries, where they start to introduce goalposts. So you can see the game evolving until we get to the 1830s, where a set of rules is laid in place, and then the 1860s, when the English Football Association is formed, and the rules are set in stone. They become laws. So you can see an evolution of the game all the way through. And it's not until you get up until the 1860s with the FA that you can sort of see similarities with other games. For instance, rugby has become a thing by then. Now, rugby was started by Webb Ellis, and it followed the evolution of football up until the 1820s, when Webb Ellis, at a rugby school, it's like a Tom Brown school days type thing, where somebody picked up the ball, John Brown picked up the ball, supposedly, and ran with it. And that was a sort of backward evolution away from the evolution of the football into sort of devolving back into mob football. Anyway, that's another video. So we have so there you've got a brief evolution of the game. Now, how was the game played? Well, mob football, the first recorded, as I said, was Atherstone. And they played that game by passing the ball up and down the high street and around the houses until the end of the time period, when the last person holding the ball won. Now, Atherstone is played by as many as 1,000, 1,500 people each year, and it's getting bigger. And that's played now within the confines of the high street. All the shops are boarded up, and the game just goes mad. It's played from, I believe, 2 o'clock in the afternoon until 5 o'clock. And the person holding the ball at the end wins. Interesting note, from 2016 to 2019, the same person won the game each year. Now, there's no real prize involved, other than the fact you've got bragging rights, and apparently, if you win the ball game, you can drink out virtually for free in any pub in Atherstone for the next year. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. Anyway, so that's at one end of the scale. That's the big end of the scale. And they still play the game in exactly the same way as it was played in 1190. The other end of the scale is the Sedgefield ball game, as I've already mentioned. Much smaller game. They rarely have more than 150 people play the game. And the way it's played there is one end of the village against the other, the east end against the west end. At each end of the village, there's a stone slab with a steel ring set into it, which is about 8 inches in diameter. And in order to score, you pass the ball through the hoop, the ring. Now, it's laid on the floor. The ball is moved around the area. You can pick it up, but it's sort of frowned upon. You mainly, if you're going to pick it up, it's to pass it to somebody else. But most of the time, you move the ball around the town, the village, it's actually a village, by kicking it. And it can go anywhere. But you score by passing the ball through the steel circle, the steel ring, and you play it, I think it's played from 12 o'clock until 3, and whoever scores, which end of the village scores the most goals, they win. Again, no prize for winning other than bragging rights. Another thing about the Atherstone ball game is they shut the town down for the day, for the period of the game. Windows are boarded up, cars are moved out of the way, traffic stop, everything. In Sedgefield, they don't do anything like that. You could actually be driving through Sedgefield on Shrove Tuesday and drive right in the middle of the game. As far as I'm aware, nobody's ever been injured by a car driving through the village, but it does happen. The first time I ever came into contact with the game was I was driving through the village, and all of a sudden I'm surrounded by all these players. If I can find it, I've got some footage of one of the ball games, and you can actually see a bus driving through the village green, and it stops as the player goes around the bus, and you can see the people on the bus watching the game. It's quite fun. I played the game once in about 1989, 1990. It was purely by accident. I just got invited to take part. Somebody said, "Do you want to go and play?" I was like, "Oh, okay then." That was when I was getting into reenactment, and it was a historical event. So I thought, yeah, whatever. Great fun. Nobody got injured. It was really good-natured. There was no injuries other than bumps and bruises and cuts and scrapes. No broken bones, just minor contusions. But one of the good things about it is a pub on the high street, and you'd see players nipping in, having a quick half or a pint, and coming back out to play the game again. Great fun. So there you've got the two extremes of the game, with and a little brief introduction into the evolution of the game as well. And as I said, still played to this day. The Sedgefield game, the Atherstone game, and numerous other games played on Shrove Tuesday. And I hope you found it interesting. Stay safe, keep slinging the sticks, and we'll talk again soon. Cheers, guys.